So today the Unlearn team is here with Rivka for Jewish Heritage Month. Rivka, could you tell us about yourself and elaborate a bit on your faith?
Hi. Well, I come from a long line of Jamaican Jews. My background is Sephardi, which is a Spanish, you could say the Spanish type of Jew, as opposed to Ashkenazi, who tend to have their origins from Eastern Europe. What can I tell you? My faith guides almost everything I do. It's always in the back of my head who I am and how I present to the world as a Jew, because quite frankly, I could be an undercover Jew. You may not necessarily say, oh, there's Rivka, she's a Jew, but I make sure that I hold my Judaism first and foremost. Am I religious per se? I learned this term the other day called flexi-dox, where it's kind of like you hold certain views that are religious, so orthodox, but you float, you kind of float. So there are some things that I am hard and fast about, even things around food, so you will not catch me eating seafood. But then there's things that I'm softer about, so you won't see me necessarily going to services every day, twice a day, or on Shabbat. And I will definitely hold to some holidays that are significant for me, and other ones it's like, okay, yes, it's a Jewish holiday today, that's lovely. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Jews of Jamaica, because one thing that is not a well-known story is, how did I get here? And it's interesting to some people, not so much to me because it's just my life, how I got here. So I come from a long line of Jamaican Jews on my mother's side, because the strict Jewish law is, who is your mother? And the history goes all the way back to when we were kicked out of Spain and Portugal, and Jamaica was the almost only safe place for Jews to go, because there was no Inquisition in Jamaica. So that's how far back my lineage goes, and a lot of Jamaican Jews. One of the things about Jamaica, one of the things about the Caribbean, is that for approximately 200 years, it was the center of Jewish life in the New World. In fact, Jews in North America, Jamaican Jews and Jews from Cuba and Jews from around the Caribbean, they are actually the feeder for the community in North America. And at one point, Jamaica was thriving Jewish community with 21 cemeteries, a bunch of synagogues, anything that you can think of when you think of Jewish life, that was Jamaica. In fact, when they do statistics, they say approximately 500,000 people of color in Jamaica have Jewish ancestry, and you see it in their last names. So if you see a last name like Lindo, I automatically think, ooh, there's a Jew in your background, you know, and it's really a very cool history, which is now being told more and more.
So would you like to elaborate a bit on your role here at the synagogue?
Okay, so at the synagogue, I am the executive director. The executive director is the person who is responsible for anything that is not strictly religious in nature. So, for example, the rabbi will determine when services are being held, what time, and what type of service. I'm the one who makes sure that the logistics around that are fine. So anything that is not tied to the rabbi is under my purview. So building, staffing, food, anything administrative. So we have, you can almost say one level, so the rabbi and myself, with differing but complementary responsibilities.
What's one thing that you wish more people knew about Jewish culture and traditions?
I wish people knew not only how it forms, no matter how religious or not religious you are, it's still such an integral part, and how family-oriented it is, how community-oriented it is. For example, for Passover, which is coming up, there's a huge religious component to it. You know, there's the requirement to be at synagogue. There's the requirement to have a Seder, which is a big meal. But the other part of it is, it's one of our biggest holidays, because it's like, it's so family focused, and it can actually be crazy, because at a table you could have like 40 members of your family. It's the equivalent of like Thanksgiving, that kind of concept, where it's like this. And so while the religious we gather because it's a religious holiday. It's such a community holiday. It's such a family thing. And I wish people knew that our tradition, there are commonalities even with other religions where we have similar things, if that makes any sense. Like it's not, this is Judaism and I can't understand it because it's only Judaism. It's like, but I can probably find an equivalent in your religion that mirrors what we do. So we're more alike than we are different.
So we'd love to hear about your unique journey as a Black Jewish individual. Did you have any, I guess, story to go along?
How much time do you have? Okay, let's start off with, I'm a woman of a certain age, and just like, I think it kind of mirrors, especially in Canada, it probably kind of mirrors the person of color experience. So when I was born many, many years ago and growing up, it was very uncommon even to see a Black Canadian because the immigration of people from the Caribbean and so on, like my parents came here in 1960, and really and truly, my mother would joke and say, it was just them, kind of in Toronto. And one time she had actually heard a Jamaican, somebody speaking in patois, and she was like, another one. And she turned around and she said, and I saw somebody who was white. And my mother forgot that there are a lot of white Jamaicans too, just for a moment she forgot, right? But anyways, so it kind of mirrors the same thing, but only in a more insular, if you will, or I don't want to say insular, smaller segment. So it was kind of challenging. I wasn't raised religiously, and it wasn't until after my marriage broke up, because I also didn't marry Jewish. And I remember looking at my kids who were very young and thinking to myself, well, I know who I am, they need to know who they are. Because if I think I'm complicated, they really are super diverse. So they have, the Jamaican Jewish part of them, Black Jamaican Jewish part of them, and they also have English, Irish, Scottish, French, Canadian from their father's side. So they are, I jokingly and lovingly say, they are a hot mess. They are really they represent diversity in incredible ways. But it was really important for them to understand that whether they choose to be Jewish, they are Jewish. And that's when I threw myself into the Jewish community. I said, okay, I'm going to start going to synagogue. I'm going to be super religious, which I was. I covered my hair. I wore sleeves, everything, skirts. Like, I'm going all in. I thought it should be easy. So when I went to a synagogue, it was like, excuse me, do you know where you are? And why are you here? And I was thinking to myself, well, I'm here because I'm Jewish, same reason you're here. And you can accept it, maybe the one-off, because I am a different face, but when it happens on the regular, you start to go, eh. And don't get me wrong, not every place was like that, but you could tell there was really a lack of understanding, even within our own community, about how diverse we are. And when I say, how does that, stereotypes are held by all communities. So there are stereotypes outside of the Jewish community. I don't play basketball, I can't sing, right? And the stereotypes, it doesn't know any boundaries, right? But for me, I think my issue was, but I truly belong here. But kids went to Hebrew school, did the whole 9 yards, and actually my daughter found this wonderful group, and I called them the Biracial Jewish Girls Club, because they were all biracial and all Jewish. So she had her group, my son had his group, and they were all named Joshua, so they all called themselves by their last name, so they found their spot, right? But I wasn't feeling comfortable. And then I went to Israel. And when I was in Israel, there was a defining moment for me. And that moment was Friday night dinners are a thing. And it's bringing in Shabbat, so bringing in our day of rest. And we light candles, we have a great meal, we hang out with friends and family, and it's just pure joy. So I really was doing Friday nights in Israel in a way that I never did it here. And I was hanging out with some friends of mine, and I looked around and I was like, this is so amazing. In this one space, we have a Jew whose family's from Peru. We have a Jew whose family's from Spain. We have a Jew whose family's from India. We have a Jew whose family is from Poland. And we have me. And look at us. We're just chilling. And that was a turning point. So I said, you know what? When I come back from Israel, I'm going to throw myself in the Jewish community, and I'm going to remind them that this is who we are and this is how we should be. And that's when I started doing presentations, going to schools, and really letting us understand, really trying to build an awareness that we are a diverse group of people. And we need to understand that within ourselves, and then that will help the world outside understand how diverse we are, if that makes sense. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I thought that was really important. So that's part of my journey. Working in the community as a Jew of color has been interesting because we probably make up, because a Jew of color, the definition is quite large. It's not just black Jews, it's Jews who either self-identify as Jews of color, just like anybody can self-identify as a person of color, right? And whose origins are outside of Eastern Europe. So we're talking Africa, we're talking the Middle East, we're talking Southeast Asia, we're talking Asia, South America. That is a very broad definition. So if you use that definition, you're talking, stats show 20 to 25% of the Jewish population would identify as Jews of color, and never mind those who are hidden. So it's not a small number. And when I think about it, I'm thinking it's probably even larger, because we tend to have a certain view of who is a Jew and what does a Jew look like. But then if you think about the Jewish communities in Africa, if you think about all these Jewish communities, and if I were to be such a person that says, let's count them all, Jews of color probably are the dominant in terms of the Jewish community as a whole.
So can you share a favorite family tradition or celebration that highlights diversity within your community?
We'll go back to Passover again. One of the things, Passover, actually a lot of Jewish celebrations, holidays, is around food, except for maybe Yom Kippur, where you fast, but then you're thinking about food. But so my tradition is around food, and it's around food at the Seder table, at the Passover dinner table. And there are rules around food. So if you are Ashkenazi, of Eastern European, one of the things you can't have, like none of us can have anything that we call chametz, so anything that rises, so no bread or donuts or things like that. We end up eating matzah, which personally I think is one of the worst things ever, but it's a thing. But also, if you're Ashkenazi, you tend to not be allowed to, because there's differing opinions, to have rice or beans. If you're Sephardi, as am I, you can have rice and beans. So one of the things I have at my table is a traditional Jamaican dish called rice and peas, even though it's rice and beans, but it's rice and peas. And that's on my table. So I will make rice and peas, and I will also have something called bami. And bami is a cassava, I don't know how to describe it. It's cassava, but it's kind of ground and flattened, so it's kind of like a pancake slash cake. It's thin and you kind of fry it, so I'll put that on my table also. So those are the things that I consider part of my tradition, which comes from Jamaica, really. And it's actually in a cookbook, a Jewish cookbook called Kosher Soul, and my Jamaican rice and peas recipe is in there.
Are there any sayings or proverbs that people could use in their everyday lives?
I don't know if I think it's just something from my family and from my mother. And one of the things that I strongly believe in, my mother would say, you have 3 strikes against you, okay? You're black, you're female, and you're Jewish. So you have to be at least 3 times better than everyone else. So it's that push to excellence, because I know I have to, and it's not for me, those aren't strikes, but I know the world sees them as strikes. So I know that I can't settle for mediocre. I can't be, you know, half measures. I have to be even better so that you see me, right? And I don't, you know, that I don't accept closed doors. And I try and teach my kids that because they carry the same conceptions with them. And it can be hard though sometimes, especially whether it's the Jewish community or not the Jewish community. You know that you present as different, and so you know you're going to be viewed as different. So I really make sure that, you know, even in terms of Jewish law, yeah, I'm going to know that. I'm going to know that. I'm going to know more than you. You know, like you really, and I find that actually is a thing with Jews of color, is that because sometimes whether it's with Jews or non-Jews, and whether it's externally driven or internally driven, we do tend to feel that we better know everything. We better know everything and then some. I also believe always be your authentic self. Even if it's challenging to be Jewish, always be Jewish, no matter what. Because you should be proud of who you are, because that is who you are. And never let anybody hide that light. And yeah.
What are some ways that non-Jewish individuals can engage and learn about Jewish heritage?
Ask. You know, that's one of the, don't be afraid. We are a community, but we also very much enjoy interacting and talking about who we are with others. We have school groups come into the synagogue, and we're practically falling over each other to say, oh, and here's what this is, and here's what we do, and here's how we do it, because nothing builds relationships better than knowing about us and knowing about others, right? And I know it sounds very like trite, if you will, to say just ask, but literally, we will welcome you in. There is no rabbi I don't know that won't go somewhere and say, here's all about us, because that leads to understanding and that leads to positive relationships. When sometimes fear, even of people of color, comes from not knowing, not having a relationship. So then you start to hold ideas about people that aren't necessarily true and that can be discounted by a simple conversation, you know? And I think that's really important in building relationships. So yeah, just ask.
Holidays often involve storytelling. Are there any Jewish folk tales or legends that you find particularly fascinating or entertaining?
Yeah, there is one, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but I will paraphrase what it is, because I think about it sometimes. It's all around something that we call lashon hara or motzi shemra, and those words are evil speech. Basically, both of those terms cover evil speech, and by evil speech we mean gossip. Okay, because that really, I know it's easy for me to say I hate gossip, but I really do. I really do. And when it takes root and just like, you know, and there is. And I'm going to so ruin this because I'm not a rabbi, but there is a story about gossip that was taken over in a town and was just slandering people or a person, and just really horrible. And the rabbi tried to explain how gossip works. And he took a pillow, a down-filled pillow with feathers, and he cut it open, and he said, these feathers are gossip, okay? They go everywhere. Now try and put them back, right? You can never undo it all. So just don't do it in the first place. And I think about that story, and I wish I knew it better, but you get the context of it. You know, it's like you cut open a pillow, it goes everywhere, and you can't unring that. You can't bring that back. And I think about that because I really struggle with people, with gossip, and not, you know, talking about people and not with people.
Okay, so let's talk food. What's your absolute favorite cultural dish or snack? guess you already shared some secret
Yeah,
family recipe.
because I'm full confession and full disclosure, which, you know, I jokingly will say to people, you might take away my Jew status because I'm not a huge foodie. I can eat the same thing every single day. However, I do love my rice and peas, which I consider a Jewish dish. I can make a pot of rice and peas and eat that for 5 days in a row. So it's probably one of my favorites. I don't have a sweet tooth, but I know a lot of people like sufganiyot, which is like the donuts. I will have one a year. And we have, you know, every culture has something similar to latkes, right? And because it's like the fried potatoes, like a hash brown, but with, you can have it with sour cream or with applesauce. I can tell you when I have a latke, it has to be with sour cream. I am not having it with applesauce. Applesauce you eat by yourself is dessert. But yeah, so latkes are cool. I'm probably one of the few people who can go to like Israel and practically can't find something to eat. And people are like, but look at all the food. I'm like, yeah, I did, yeah. It's a toughie for me. It's a toughie. I cook a lot, but I'm not a foodie.
So let's switch gears to entertainment. Are there many Jewish entertainers that you have, or do you have a favorite? Can you share top 3?
Ooh, okay, so I'm going through a thing right now. As far as entertainers, okay, I probably like the same people that everybody else kind of likes, and I probably, there are some Jewish entertainers and I'm like, oh man, you know, no, not a thing. One of the things I love to play this game, Who is a Jew of Color in entertainment, because there are many that people don't even realize, you know, never mind like the Lisa Bonet, who is a Jew, so like Zoe Kravitz, or people who are Jewish descent that are in Hollywood. I actually have a whole slideshow with all these famous Jews of color. But in terms of music, I'm going through this thing where I'm listening to old Israeli Jewish musicians. It's kind of like 70s stuff, but it's so folksy. I don't know what's happening to me. Maybe it's because I'm getting older. So one of my favorites is Shlomo Artzi. And Shlomo Artzi is just a really, he's generally speaking, he's a good man. And he's probably one of the few artists from a particular generation that are still around. So one of his songs is called Tetaru Lachem. And I play that on repeat. And the message is like, basically it means imagine. And it's just imagine the beautiful sun, imagine. And it just gives you this calming, peaceful vibe. And so that's kind of where I am right now. Because my job can be a lot, and music can make you feel good, as we know, and so that's where I'm kind of right now, is just listening to old style music that is not necessarily Jewish. I seem to be stuck in the 70s right now, and I can't get out.
Okay, so Hollywood and especially sitcoms have played a large part in creating stereotypes. Do you have any you'd like to debunk? Like
a lot of stereotypes. First of all, when they have a Jew of color in a sitcom, just make him like just a regular person. He doesn't have to have flaws, you know, because that implies that a Jew of color has flaws automatically. There are, yeah, I mean, Hollywood thrives on stereotypes. There's stereotypes for people of color, right? That we're slowly starting to kind of mitigate. Absolutely, like stereotypes around our relationship with money, sure. Stereotypes around how our mothers are, you know, the typical Jewish mom. I'm a Jewish mom, you know? Am I like Seinfeld, the mothers on Seinfeld, you know? No. So some of those I'd like them to at least soften. I get the comedic effect. The comedic effect, it can be funny, you know, we could laugh about it, but we have to also recognize that some people are actually believing this is who we are. Right? That's the danger of stereotypes, whether they are good stereotypes or bad stereotypes. Stereotype is still a stereotype, right? So name one, I probably would like to see it lessened, whether it's a good one or a bad one, because we are not a monolithic people. None of us are.
So lastly, what's one piece of advice you'd give to someone interested in exploring and embracing Jewish heritage and culture?
Go for it. You know, whether you're Jewish or not Jewish, it's always good to know about other things. So imagine 5,000, almost 6,000 years of existence. That's a lot of stuff. And whether you realize it or not, some of our cultures and traditions have become mainstream for communities. Our system of law, you know, things that you just take for granted, some of them are rooted in Jewish law, tradition, and culture. So learning about us, in some ways, is also learning about yourself. So yeah.
The historical events that led to the celebration of Hanukkah involved a struggle against darkness, both literal and metaphorical. How do you think the themes of light and darkness relate to our lives during Hanukkah?
For Hanukkah is more complicated than people realize. It is one of the holidays that actually isn't in our holy books. It's outside of that. And it really, it's a historical story. And it really is, the whole Hanukkah story is actually about a fight for Jews to exist as Jews and not to be assimilated, which is, in essence, means to disappear. So there was a group that really were fighting, like physically, the Maccabees physically fighting against that. The hope comes from the story around the oil and how, you know, it lasted for 8 days, which it never should have. And so really it is, you know, there's the story of the darkness and the fight, but then there's that story of the hope. And no matter how things may feel, you know, in the world today for all of us, that just hang on to that light, that hope, and make that hope grow and spread and last. And I think that's kind of a message for all of us.
Hanukkah often coincides with other cultural and religious celebrations. How can we embrace diversity and foster understanding during this festive season?
You mean the fact that it usually runs with Christmas?
Yeah.
Why didn't you just say that?
Yeah.
And what is so interesting about it is it kind of organically merged anyways, because here's the irony of it. Hanukkah is a story about not assimilating, yet because of where it coincides, it's kind of become an assimilated holiday. So we jokingly talk about Hanukkah bushes, right? Instead of a Christmas tree, here's my Hanukkah bush. We have a custom now in doing Hanukkah, which I refuse to do with my kids, but 8 days of gifts. There was no such thing as even gifts. It was like you played a dreidel game, a little game on the top, and your gift was, here's your gelt, which was actually a gambling game. Yeah, we were corrupting our youth. It was a great gambling game, and all of a sudden it morphed itself into, where's my present for every day? With my kids, it was like, you get one present, and I'm not even sure why I'm doing this. Maybe because I don't want you to be laughed at school, but that's it. But I joke about it, but it is actually kind of cool. It's probably one of the only holidays where both communities are celebrating something together and separately and together at the same time. And, you know, there's even something really interesting. A lot of Christmas songs were written by Jews, which I always found interesting. And yeah, and you have Elf on a Shelf. We will have, like, you know, Mensch on a bench. A mensch is a good person, so we have Mensch on a bench, which is kind of a takeoff on Elf on a Shelf. So they've kind of become, I do find it ironic that a holiday that's meant to rejoice in not being assimilated has almost assimilated, but it's all good. It's all good.
What role do you think storytelling plays in passing down Hanukkah traditions from generation to generation?
Oh, it's huge. I think in any culture, storytelling is the way you keep your cultures and your traditions alive, right? And we are really big and good at telling stories, whether they are stories that are part of our tradition of learning, because even our tradition of learning involves stories. You know, there's a word for it which I've totally blanked out on, but we do tell stories to send messages, and those stories get passed generation upon generation rabbinically. And we also tell our own family stories that get passed on. You know, Booby or Safta or Grandma used to do this, or Great Booby, Great Grandmother, or so on used to do this, and here's a story of how this came about. Here's a story of how we came to Canada. Here's a story of this, and here's why. Oh, you know, here's why this thing is so important to us. Here's the story behind that. Storytelling keeps things alive because it's a really easy way to pass on information too, is you couch it in a story and you're going to remember it. Even if you don't tell the story properly, you're going to tell the story, right? As opposed to saying, oh, read it in the book, right? Stories are cool.